Teiras. The peoples of the countries between the Black Sea and the northern country of Rifat, and to the west all the way to the Netherlands. Japhet's last son is Teiras, when he is also mentioned as Tiras. That other name is more Greek than of Hebrew language. The least has been written about the land of Tiras because it was mistaken for Thrace. There is a certain logic in the Bible of showing countries and people. Thrace belongs to Jovan, so even if it were presented as a separate country, it would undoubtedly be named as one of Jovan's sons. But Teiras is Jovan's brother, and that means a much wider country than Thrace, not in the land of Jovan, but somewhere next to it, in a neighborhood. If historians had taken a little more account of that logic of exposition in the Holy Scriptures, they would have not even looked at Thrace. Josephus tells us, Tiras is called Teiras, Trakas, and the name was changed by the Greeks to Orakas. Greek urges to put everything in and around Greece are very well known, so this should have been taken into account. According to Bohardius, the name Thrace is written by the Jews in two ways, Thracia or Tressa, and in translation 72, Tiras was written Teiras. That was enough to see that we talk about two completely different names. When Joseph's testimony that the Greeks are when Joseph's testimony that they are Greeks is added to the change that name, then it is clear that Thrace is not that country. It is true that the land of Teiras is located north of Thrace and borders on it, as well as that some names of places in those two countries were the same, which is understandable. What is difficult to understand is that vast majority of historians who have dealt with those issues simply repeat, Tiras is Thrace, and it all ends in one sentence. Only two of them are an exception. Bohardius was the first to step into land of Teiras. He says that in Thrace and its neighborhood that is north of it, there are a number of names that are related to the name Tiras, Teiras, and they are Attiras, Tiristasis, Trasus, Trausi, Agatrisi, Idatrisi, Tiras, Tiris, Tearus, Tirias, Turas, Tures, Turos, Tritas, Tero, Tereus, Terops, Teres, and Tiris. Most of these names are located north of Thrace, and only a small number is in Thrace. These names were recorded according to the Greek orthography and transferred to Latin, so none of them was faithfully transmitted as it was in the language of the people of that country. We will add to this list Herodotus' Agatirses in Ukraine and the Tisagetes in Kama Valley. Boschar says, Teiras is Dacia. Stephen of Byzantium says that the Agatyrs are located on the Helm Peninsula, in fact on the Danube. Similar to Boschar and Edward Wells, he stepped, albeit hesitantly, into land of Teiras, when one wonders that is not perhaps the land of Teiras on Dniester when the Greeks called it Tiras. It is true on Dniester and from here much further west through Europe. The land of Teiras from Izorod means the area between the Black Sea and the northern land of Rifat, and to the west all the way to the Netherlands. That is why Ben Gurion says, Teiras are Russians, acquaintances and Englishmen. By acquaintances he means Poles, and he counts Englishmen because they originate from the area of the land of Teiras. This time too the Arabs surprise us with their good knowledge of ancient geography and ethnography from Izorod. Bohardius mentions Arab writers and says that they included Persia under Teiras. Their setting seems like a surprise, but only at first glance, because the fact is that the Persians, that is, the Parsi tribe, originated from the area above the Black Sea, that is, from the land of Taras. The Persians came to Asia after Med and imitated Med in everything. In their life, in their way of dressing, in their weapons, in their organization of government, and so on. In fact, they took over the Asian Empire from Mede like their younger brothers. It should be borne in mind that the Arabs were under rule of Assyria for a long time, and from there they inherited a lot of knowledge, as well as knowledge of ancient geography. We see Arabs as allies of Nino, which means that they were not one of the conquered people in Serbian and Assyrian Empire, but had a position of allies, and thus access to higher social strata, culture and science. As for the Greeks and their diversion of the name Teiras to Thrace, it can be understood. The ancient Greeks did not know the geography of Central, Western and Northern Europe. They did not study non-Greek writers, considering them barbarians. Those who were translated into Greek as Homer were declared Greeks. The only Greek who traveled to Scandinavia was Pythea from Marseille, when Strabo says he wrote more from his own head than what he actually saw. The northernmost country known to the Greeks was Thrace. The Greeks knew only the lower Danube, from the Black Sea to Gerdape, and beyond that they had no clear idea. It so happened that all Greek writers during Alexander's campaign in the Danube region, and especially in Srem, presented Srem as an island in Danube, small people's island, Peuke at the mount of Danube. There seemed to be large forests, wide fields and cities on that island. This proves that Greek knowledge of geography, even of the Middle Danube region, dates back to the 4th century BC, was very bad. When they heard from other people that the land of Taras is north of Greece, they concluded that it was Thrace. Everything that was north of Thrace, the Greeks called this country Hyperborean, which literally means over the Bura, over the wind, over the northern wind, which the Serbs called Bura. The Greeks called the Boreos, and the Hyperboreos is over Bora. With such knowledge of the geography of Europe, one could not go far. Strabon says that the Greeks called the Scythians and Celts all the people who live about the Black Sea, the Danube and the Adriatic Sea. Those ancient writers who wrote before the first Greek historians distinguish between these northern people. Thus we learn that Strabon used writers older than the first Greek historians who they knew the geography of Europe better. Strabon says that these ancient writers before the Greeks placed the Sarmatians above the Danube. We have already said that the name Sarmati is just different name for Serbs. Edward Wells notes that the god of war among the Thracians was called Turas, mentioned by Homer in Iliad. Wells connects the name of this god with the name of the land of Taras. Here we are on a threshold of resolving the origin and meaning of the name of country Taras. This Turas is in fact the Serbian god Tot, after whom they called Teuriski, which means the people of god Teut. Bergman explains the origin of the names Teutons and Deutschland and says, they were all considered to be descended from god Teutos and were called Teutskes, a name that the Germans later changed to Teutsche, then Deutsche, and French to Tudesks. It is very common occurrence among the ancient people to call themselves by the name of their supreme god and to consider him their ancestor since they originated. Serbian tribes who moved from the Danube region to Central Europe, to area of later Germany and to Rodania, France, celebrated Teuta as their supreme god, and were named Teutars after him. That is why the whole Central Europe and a part of Western Europe in Izorod is called Teiras. It is, in fact, the land of Teutars, which, by passing through foreign languages, became the Teiras.